Now we're going to talk about authoring practices. We know that Essence is a standard with a language. What do we do with it? Well, we can just pick a practice. We can just pick a practice from the ecosystem and we can start using it. And that's the simplest way. No authoring, or rather the authoring has already been done for us by the expert who authored the practice or probably created the practice. Now, we often want to make some small changes. There might be something really simple. For example, in this case, I might want to have a standard agenda for my sprint review. I might want to write that down so that everybody can see it. They might choose to use it or not, but I'd like to give that to them, and let's make that part of my customized practice. Or maybe there's some extra things that my organization requires, some form of teams sync or something like that, that might not be a formal practice, but it's definitely something that I need to do, my teams need to engage with. And if I can describe that using the Essence language, I can be really clear that people are going to get value from that event. It's not just a meeting they go to, it's a meeting that's an activity written in the Essence language, which means I need to decide what does it achieve. Are there particular roles that people have or responsibilities, and how often does it happen and things like that? So I can do these small changes. Or I can do a full bespoke practice. Just like Kanban or Scrum or psychological safety or BDD, I can write my own practice. So maybe that's something that my organization has to describe how we do team of teams. Maybe it's how we do our particular deployment. Maybe it's something to do with cybersecurity or anything. But very often organizations have extra things that they do that are not just part of Scrum or just part of SAFe or something else. So we can use Essence to create whole bespoke practices that then become part of our ecosystem that our teams use alongside any other practice that they have access to. So let's look at that and summarize it. So we've got the ability to customize practices. How? We can add local roles, we can use different language, we can add detail. The language is an interesting one. One of the things that is really an inhibitor to change is when you make people learn new language. So if it matters that we call a Scrum Master, a team lead, or a project manager, or whatever else in my organization, we can tweak the language to make that land better, to make it easier to accept. The converse is true as well. Maybe I've got a term in my organization that means something else. I might want to change a practice term to make it different so people know that it's not the same. And then we can add, as I say, whole practices, maybe around things like risk management, program management, things like that. Now, especially when we're talking about practices that have already been written inside an organization, why would I do that? I've already got potentially dozens of Confluence pages or Word documents that already describe how I work. And what we find when we essentialize those things is we get some really important outcomes. We get better consistency, we get stronger coherence, and we get clarity on the purpose. Now, what does that mean? Now, very often, in fact, I saw it today in a single web page where we're looking at a practice and it had the term API and it was expanded, application programming interface. And then it was expanded again, application program interface. We worked with one client who had a PMO, and there were in one document 5 different expansions of PMO, various combination of program, project, product, management, organization, office. So very often when we do have a practice or ways of working written down in an organization, it's not clear and it's not consistent. So with Essence, because we've got a set of language elements, we are defining, what are the work products? We'll define that work product once and we'll give it a name, and that name is going to be correct. And if I have another reference to it in a different document that's a different name, well, it's either they should be the same, in which case we choose the right name, or they're different, in which case we describe why are they different. So taking an existing set of ways of working and using the Essence language to describe it as a local practice is a really good way to improve your existing practices. And I almost guarantee you will find problems with it. And Essence will end up with a cleaner description of your way of working. And that's before you get all the benefits of actually it being easier to learn and easier to use. And the purpose was really interesting as well, because Essence talks about the essential things. We want to make sure everything in a practice is meaningful and it's important. That means it's got to have purpose. There's no point in tracking the state of something if the state doesn't matter. So we need to think about what states do we track and which do we find important. We got to think about which things are worth creating a work product for and which don't need to be defined, what guidance we give, what roles we have. So everything is done for a reason. And thinking through that and talking to people about what the reason is for why we do things very often results in people identifying there's stuff in our existing ways of working that isn't important, it's not essential, and it shouldn't really be mandated and it shouldn't be written down. And then there's all the inconsistencies. And that coherence bit's about the connection between the elements. Essence has got semantics, things have meaning, and you have associations between different bits of your practice, and you make sure you know why they are there. So it gives you purpose and clarity. So even if you got what you think is an existing way of working, Essence can help make that better. If you're building something from scratch, then setting out with thinking about what do we care about tracking the state of, what do we want to create, what do we want to do, what guidance and help do we want to give people, that gives you a really clear way to start thinking about what is it that I want to be describing in my practice. So the authoring gives us some really important aspects to it. One of those is the ability to support cultural change and transformation, because culture is a product of how we work and the mindset and our behaviors and our habits. If I write my practice well, I can embed those habits and practices and values into my practice. If I then use Essence to help that practice be well understood and better adopted by my teams, what will follow is those teams will be demonstrating the right behaviors and habits and mindset that will give me the culture that I desire. This one's a bit tricky for some people. It's not as obvious, and we can talk about it in the transformation section in a bit more detail. But for example, think of Scrum. Scrum has principles and values built right into the practice. Most people will probably skip past them when they do the training. And if you ask, it's actually a nice test. If you ask a Scrum team, what are the core principles and values in Scrum? What would they tell you? Would they talk about the pillars of Scrum, inspection, adaptation, and transparency? Would they talk about the values, focus, commitment, respect, etc.? Because they're built into Scrum. And one of the ways that Essence helps practices be adopted well is that it allows us to say, well, let's start looking at those. Let's take that card inside Scrum, the one that says, I just found it in my pack here, the one that says, for example, focus. And just like all cards in Essence, every card, every element is a placeholder for a conversation. So I might pick that card, focus, and say, how does that help us in our sprint review or our sprint planning? Do we always focus on the current sprint? Do we always focus on the sprint goal? Do we always focus on the product goal that we're working towards? Do we get distracted by other things or not? Or are we actually not sure which product goal this sprint goal is helping with? Are we not sure? Are we doing things that are not related to the sprint goal, but we're doing them anyway? Because bringing that into the conversation with the team and raising that will make the team think, well, why am I not doing that? I should be just doing things that are related to the sprint goal, or maybe I've got the wrong sprint goal. So you can see in that small example why if I've chosen that focus is an important value for my team, I can start bringing in aspects of that to how they work. I can bring it into retrospectives, I can bring it into coaching sessions, I can bring it into the conversation with the team. And the more I do that, the more that focus will become something that is not needing to be reminded to the team, but becomes something they do naturally. And then I can move on to a different value and reinforce that. And if I want different values to be the ones that team focuses on, then I can construct my practice in a way that focuses on different values. So it allows me to use the practices to really get towards the culture that I want. So a really key part of authoring a practice is also thinking, what do I want the emergent habits and behaviors and mindset to be? Because I can build them in if I want to. What does practice authoring look like? Well, you can just use PowerPoint and Word documents and draw pictures and create cards like that if you really want. We use tooling for it. We've got two different kinds of tool. Teamspace that you'll see later in the demonstration is a nice way to author, especially within a team, making those small changes, customizing changes that only live within my team's environment. They're not global across an organization. We've got a more thorough authoring tool called Workbench on the right, and you can see there that there's a lot more parameters you can configure, and it results in these cards that you can print. Teamspace is a digital tool that you interact with inside the tool. It doesn't produce paper output, but the authoring is it's one of those things that you can learn and you can get good at, but Essence helps you do a good job straight away. It walks you through it when you use it in Teamspace, and you don't need to be an expert methodologist to make helpful, sensible customizations of existing practices. And actually, you don't need to be an expert methodologist to write great practices using Essence. Essence helps you do that quite well. And the point of it being a simple, intuitive language is it makes it more accessible.